And here is a letter excerpt to the Ministry of Defense in England dated October 4th, 1999. It was about a scientist's father who worked as security guard for Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The son reported to the MOD that his father overheard Churchill tell then General Eisenhower about a silver metallic disc that shocked an RAF pilot with its aerial maneuvers. In fact, the distinction or the details that were given is that a disc was doing this around a Royal Air Force fighter that was near the German border, and that it was considered to be moving at a rate in circles around a jet that was moving in the air that was completely beyond any aerial ability of humans at the time. The security guard, whose son is the scientist who communicated this to the MOD, heard Prime Minister Churchill say to Eisenhower that, quote, the incident should be immediately classified for at least 50 years. That would be 2 generations, and that would have been around 1994. Because that was in 1944, and now it is 70 years later in 2014, and the reason for suppression of truths and facts has changed from Churchill's possibly noble worries about panic to a 1% elite that is keeping octopus tentacles around their power greed superiority over the dumbed down and poor 99% mass, which is us. I have been a TV producer, writer, director, editor, and investigative reporter since graduating from Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, with a master's degree in communication in 1968. And there I made a documentary film for the Stanford Medical Center, and my master's thesis was a picture calculus about the very first efforts to use computers to analyze atomic particle bombardment images at the Stanford Linear Accelerator. So I was grounded in science and environment and medicine right from the very beginning in my work at Stanford. And a decade later, I was working as director of special projects at the CBS affiliate KMGH-TV Channel 7 in Denver, Colorado. And that's where I produced the film A Strange Harvest, about the worldwide bloodless, trackless animal mutilations that first broadcast on May 25, 1980. And today, in this workshop about a taxonomy of extraterrestrial entities, I'm going to present illustrations and information from human abductees, whistleblowers, and alleged government documents, even if I cannot yet prove everything that I'm going to share with you with hard evidence, which is always my goal. But in this field, it's a razor blade field, and it's very difficult. In 1994, my second book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1, Facts and Eyewitnesses, was published with a 50-page taxonomy of extraterrestrial entities that came from all of the illustrations from people that I had interviewed who had been in the abduction syndrome, and I've always asked people to draw for me the entities, the craft, details as much as possible. And that was a visual taxonomy that included color and black and white. And I grouped together different types of alien beings by shape and color, because that's all I had to work with little understanding about the relationship of the beings to each other. And I'm going to go through and show you some of the images from that taxonomy in Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1. And for people who are asking, my books weigh about 4 pounds each, and that's why I don't ship them around. But since 1999 and my work at earthfiles.com, the news website, there's a shop. It has documentaries I've done. It has my 4 books. They've been the same price since 1999. They're always there. They're always available. So go to earthfiles.com and check out the Earthfiles shop. Now, in this taxonomy in Glimpses Volume 1, these were drawn by a teenager named Cindy Tyndall, who in Houston, Texas, May 1973, was with her mom Judy Doherty, and 3 other members of their family when they were arguing about what was a moving light in the sky, pulled over the car, and what they experienced is that everybody in the car was put in a state of suspended animation, sort of like the Betty Andreessen case, except that Judy Doherty, and she didn't know at the time, she discovered later her teenage daughter, were taken up in a pale beam of yellow light. And on board, they watched snake-eyed gray creatures. You've got one in the upper right here, drawn by Cindy. They had an insect entity and another being with large black eyes who seemed more gentle and kind. The non-human entities all worked in a lab excising tissues from the calf that they saw rising in the pale yellow beam of light into the disc where they ended up. Cindy, the teenager, and Judy were both examined. Swabs of tissue was taken from inside of their mouth. Cindy also sketched this mushroom-headed being that had narrow oriental-looking eyes with vertical pupils, and this non-human also worked with tubes in a round laboratory room during the abduction with her mother and the calf from the Houston pasture. So you've got a mixture in this one case of different types of shaped heads, eyes, and heights. Now, here, completely different type. Memphis, Tennessee, 1980s. An adult male encountered this tall, red-haired being during an abduction. Similar red-haired types have been described by abductees in Nevada, Southern California, and the Andes Mountains of Peru. And I would like to digress for a moment to tell you about an extraordinary experience that I had in Peru in 1987. I was there for a month, and I went down after talking with Brian Fraser, who had, or James Fraser, who had been sort of monitoring and trying to collect data on the famous Brian Scott case. And he brought over to my office in Denver whole volumes of material that he was collecting that included 16-millimeter film of Brian Scott, the abductee, changing personalities, changing voices, talking like a computer, was downloading data at such a rate that they tape recorded him and had it transcribed. And when they had the transcription of mathematical data and formulas that nobody understood that was doing the investigation, least of all Brian Scott, they ended up sending this information to somebody in the UFO field who was investigating abductions. And they ended up getting an angry phone call from an astronomer in Ireland called Duncan Lunan. And he was raging at the Jim Fraser, saying, "You have no right to steal my work. I am preparing this manuscript to be published, and you are putting out all of my work and my math, and I want to know how you got it." That's true, literal. I talked with Brian Scott about this. I talked with Jim Fraser about this. Here they downloaded in this abduction scenario information that was to a T identical to what this astronomer was preparing in his private office in Ireland. And the story is huge. It involved a trip to Peru. Brian Scott appeared to be taking on different forms, seemed to be talking from the point of view of Viracocha. It's a very complex, amazing case. Jim Fraser, in 1987, had contacted me about trying to do a documentary about the Brian Scott case, and I was getting ready to go on this trip to Peru. And he said, "You must go to Pia Pinte." This is outside of Cusco, up in the Andes, and he said, "I know an archaeologist, and he lives in Cusco. His father worked as a medical nurse. In Peru, they did not have hospitals, but they had medical nurses that would travel on a route. Sometimes it would take a year or 2 years for them to go around villages. And one of those villages, Pia Pinte, the archaeologist's father had been about 5 years before Jim is talking to me, and he said, this man that I want you to hook up with, the archaeologist, he heard his father, the medical person, ask him, the archaeology student at the time, why would there be tall Shirley MacLaines in Pia Pinte? And the son said, what are you talking about? And the father said, I was there on one of our medical, and there were these, they must have been 6 to 7 feet tall. And their skin was white as white cotton sheet. And their eyes were crystal blue. And their hair was copper red and long. And he said, we tried to deal with who are they? So I get to Peru. I go to this office. I find this son. I explain that Jim Frazier and Brian Scott have asked me to come. Can he take me to Pia Pinte? Well, the Sandinera Luminosa in June of 1987, when I was there, were blowing up. The trains going south to Lake Titicaca. They were blowing up bridges and roads up in the mountains. And he said, Linda, I don't know. I don't know if we can get to Pia Pinte without being blown up or arrested. And I said, this would be my one trip. Let's try it. And we went out and we rented a taxi, and it was like for 2 days, and it was something like $30 US to drive all the way up into the Andes looking for these red-haired extraterrestres. And this really happened. We are on the road. We get to a particular spot. The security guard stops us this way, guns. We're in this taxi, and the archaeologist speaks in Spanish, and I could hear that I was this American and a journalista, and I was on trying to meet these red-haired extraterrestres. And I'm thinking, oh God, the policeman is going to turn us back right now. Honest to God, the policeman said, yo sé, extraterrista. And the policeman now starts telling the archaeologist about their encounters with beams, discs, and that they know all about these red-haired extraterrestrials in Pia Pinte. And now I'm thinking, you know, my adrenaline started. Linda, are you prepared to deal with 7-foot-tall extraterrestrials? We drive further. It was very treacherous. It was just like this. There's no guardrails. There's nothing. And there would be places where I'd be looking straight down thinking, Holy Father, please help me. And we get to more police, blue lights. They're out in the middle of the road and they're stopping, and we went through the same exact thing, only this policeman had more information. We were closer to Pia Pinte. He knew all about the red-haired extraterrestrials, said that if we had the time to go up to the mountain right above Pia Pinte, that he, the police officer, had been up there where a silver disc had landed, and that there was this huge oval, and that it had sunk into the ground. There was this depression, and that we should go up and see where this silver disc had been. So we kept on driving, and we got to say a village. I'm not sure that Americans understand. We're talking about, you know, there's like a few little buildings and a few little houses, but you are up in the Andes, like at the end of the world, and the only other thing beyond this village is this other tall peak. And I said to the archaeologist, how long do you think it would take us to climb that mountain? And he said, probably 2 days. So we keep going, and the next thing that happens, we had slowed down, it's the taxi, and at least 40 children started running toward us, surrounded the car, literally surrounded the car, and the archaeologist got out by himself and he talked to everybody. And the children sort of backed away into a group. And I got out, and the taxi cab driver pulled the taxi up while we walked, with the children sort of around us. So now we are entering Pia Pinti for the first time in this group of children from the village. And the archaeologist is asking the children, where are the red-haired extraturistas? And you could hear all of this chatter, and the children are doing this. And he said, I think there's one in this house. Do you want to go knock on the door? And honestly, you know, the adrenaline. And I said yes. And while we're walking with the children just now, all agitated, I'm thinking in my head, well, Linda, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, give me a chance to get your telepathic download. Please don't zap me out. Please don't abduct me. Just do it more slowly and let me see. I'm thinking all these thoughts as we are walking toward this house. And when we get there, it is a solid lapis blue door. It is extraordinarily beautiful and eerie at the same time amid the other little houses. The archaeologist knocked on the door. God is my witness. What opened up that door? He was about my height, 5'2", and instead of having all of the dark brown hair of everybody, there were all this copper red swaths, Travis Walton kind of hair. You know what I mean? And all of the other children and everybody that we had met, they had dark brown eyes, and we're looking at almost sky blue. It was a blue that was so intense in these faces with this copper brushed through this hair. But here's the other, coming up, like if you put milk in coffee and you just start the turn and it starts to swirl, imagine that you're looking at skin that has what looks like a swirl of cream in coffee. And I was just stunned. And I said to the archaeologist, ask him who his parents are. They talk, and this guy says, go to this house. Well, ask him if he knows where the tall red-haired extraterrestrials. Points up to the mountain, and they're talking about how that they've been up there, but that the extraterrestrials that used to live in the village aren't there anymore, but his parents knew them very well. So now we walk to another, and it's another lapis door. They were the only lapis doors. We knock, the door opens, and it could be his cloned twin. It was the same thing, this copper red going all through this hair, these strange, eerie, beautiful sky blue eyes, and all of this mulatto sort of skin. And there we learned, because this was a slightly older person, somehow was related to the other man, maybe a father. You would never have believed it. They didn't look aged. They just looked slightly different. And the father said that, yes, he had communicated with what they called it was extraterrestre estrella or something like that, meaning stars. They were from red-haired people from the stars. That they had known them, that they had come and helped them in the village, that they had a disc that they came and went from the top of the mountain, but they were gone. But yes, if we wanted to spend 2 days, they would be happy to take us up to the top of the mountain to see this oval at the top. When you are in Cusco, which we finally got back to the next day, and you go into the market, the people who sell the cocoa leaves are called pintes. They come from Pia Pinti. And what are you looking at? They're all female, and their hair, just like those guys at the doors, have all of this copper red. That's what they're called. And the locals refer to the red hair of the pintes who sell the cocoa leaves. I'm setting the stage for this whole question about the cloning, the hybridization, which I'm going to talk about in great detail on Monday, but the idea that on this planet, in cultures such as Peru, the idea of mixed blood with extraterrestrials is not foreign to them at all, and that there was a sense of, if I had just been there maybe a month or two earlier, I could have shaken the hand of, had a telepathic download with these tall red hairs that if we could go back to the slide picture, because now I'm going to go back to lots of slides. Something like this is part of the abduction syndrome. And what is the relationship between the tall red hairs, the tall blondes, the tall black hairs, the tall whites, and a whole series of others that I'm now going to continue to go through. Now, this is a fascinating case that I go into great depth in Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. This was a New Jersey 1987 case, and this involved the abductee. The main concentration of the abductee was a black woman who was with her family traveling at Thanksgiving time on the Pennsylvania Turnpike right out of Harrisburg. They had stopped and gotten gas. 2 cars, because there were 7 family members and they had 5 in one car and 2, and they were tailing each other. They knew that they got the gas. Both cars, both drivers had the receipts of the gas from the gas station. I saw both of them on this day, and both cars, 7 people, the very next memory is they're 200 and some miles away in New Jersey. Any of us experiencing something like that would go crazy wondering what happened. It took a while. She ended up asking people. She worked in a mayor's office, and she had great concern that if anybody knew that she had been involved in any kind of an abduction, she would lose her job. So we had to work together extremely carefully, and I have never ever used her real name or which city, but she was working in a mayor's office. And when they got aboard, all of the family members and both cars were in a craft, but she is the only one that they seemed to be interested in. The whole family was left in a state of suspended animation. She saw that, with little grays going around her family while she was taken with the 7-foot-tall, blonde female humanoid that had what she called white, pearlescent, translucent skin. Some people have said it reminds them of marble. Think of very fine marble that is white and has a kind of bluish cast. The New Jersey female abductee thought that the male's eyes were more golden and the female's a pale crystal blue, but she compared both of their eyes to a cat's, in which there are vertical dark pupils and no white showing. The female abductee stressed that when she first saw the tall male humanoid, that his eyes were solid black. Quote, "He took something off his eyes like shields, and there were cat eyes underneath," close quote. In the lower right corner down here are 2 overlapping, what would be triangles without bases inside of a circle. And these were on the uniforms or leotard-like jumpsuits of 2 of the very tall beings that she was dealing with. And when she asked telepathically or thought, what does this mean? The answer came back into her head, quote, "The merging of 2 worlds," close quote. She did not know which 2 worlds or why. Let's assume that the Earth might be one of those 2, but what is the interaction? What would be the merging of 2 worlds and why? That same New Jersey female also sketched this tall, beak-nosed humanoid male over here. He's wearing the tight skull cap, which comes up very often in cases around Area 51, Hawaii. This type is drawn a lot. And he was working with another cat-eyed, tall blonde and the dark-haired beings during an abduction experience that kept going for her for quite a while. And here is yet another blonde type that was encountered in Springfield, Missouri, March 1982, to show you how confusing this is. This is an adult female who was abducted by a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired male humanoid in a brown jumpsuit that had a winged insignia on the upper left chest. These triangles that are drawn by many people in the abduction syndrome, you would think that you would finally get answers to what do they mean. The most classic on the Eben type that we're going to talk about in more depth is a circle with a triangle in it. The circle with the two overlapping triangles about the merging of two worlds is usually only associated with the tall humanoid ones. And then this patch is a variation on a theme in which there is a triangle, and it can be what looks like a caduceus. It might be a reptile. Some abductees think it is exactly the caduceus we use in medicine, and others are like this one. It's either like a dragon or a winged bird, but that does come up in several cases. Southern California, 1990, the adult female drew these 3 non-humans after an abduction experience that she said they had light brownish yellow skin. This ties into several people that I've interviewed who said they thought they were dealing with Filipinos. The being The being on the right also has a triangle inside a circle on his upper right chest. That is one of the most common symbols in the abduction syndrome associated with the EBENs, extraterrestrial biological entities. Now, that symbol has been seen by many abductees, including Jean Robinson in Springfield, Missouri. She drew this circle around an equilateral triangle that she remembered on the left breast of her abductor's bodysuit. And we have all talked about what is the significance of the triangle and the circle symbol seen in so many encounters with the various gray-skinned and light brownish yellow types of beings. Why are there different sizes, skin colors, head shapes, and eyes among the gray-skinned entities? Why are there different looking blonde types, some tall, some short? Why do some tall blonde types wear insignias of overlapping triangles in a circle, while shorter blondes have something like a bird or a snake or the caduceus inside a round insignia on their uniforms? Why do some humans report seeing standing up lizards or alligators, while others say that it does look like a standing up crocodile to them with scales all over the body? Always confusing to me has been the question, what are the relationships between various entities? And I'm going to show you some more illustrations from my original taxonomy so that I can show you why I think that the menagerie of so many different kinds over the decades and centuries probably are the product of only 2 or 3 what I'll call prime intelligences. And for this presentation, I'm going to define prime intelligence as one of the top dogs behind the scenes, in which in the foreground we are dealing with many, many genetic creations, either hybrids or full-blown clones. Mount Vernon, Missouri, 1990. Pale gray entity with large slanted black eyes with a triangle on its blue uniform surrounding what looks like a crescent moon emitting energy. This was drawn by Paula Watson, who does not mind her real name being used, who had repeated abductions from 1983 onward after she and her husband Ron watched small gray-skinned non-humans float a black cow from a nearby pasture into a strange craft by a lizard guy. His hands had only 4 fingers, and I've been at this location walked all of the ground with them. We talked with the farm. It was a pasture across from their house in Missouri, very rural. And when they saw